Hey Zaleafers, this is SuperZombieBBQ, and today we are going to be going through something you have been asking for a lot, and that is covering off the best and worst cards across Elite, Hardened, and Ultimate Tier, male and female, and you've been asking for this ever since Season 3 came out, and we're finally in a position to be able to give this to you! Let's cover off what today's list is about, and this is about the Hardened and Elite cards. We're going to cover these off, then we're going to cover off the females in a separate video, and then we'll cover off the Ultimates all together in one big list afterwards in a separate upload. But let's look at the Hardened and Elite cards first of all, and if you've seen these before, you'll know what the format is. But we're going to cover off the 5 best and worst across the board, apart from the females. The females will cover off the entire tier. Then we'll cover off the best and worst stats in those tiers as well, so you know which cards have got the best stats, which cards have got the worst stats. Now, I can't really call it top 5 or a bottom 5, because realistically speaking, there is sometimes 10 or 11 cards in that bottom and top 5 as such. So I'm just going to do it by rankings and the overall points. And it's important that you know that that card you've got that might be the worst or the best, it might not be the worst or the best to you. And it also might not be the most useful. For example, Shinsuke Nakamura is a great example where he beats some of the cards in 3 stats at the top of the tier, even though he's not really a true top 5 card. He does appear in the top 5, but maybe he's like the 5th or the 6th or something like that. Or even if you're looking at some of one of the tiers, he's actually like the 7th or the 8th best card. So let's have a look at the overall rankings. It doesn't necessarily mean that these cards are bad for you. You might have a pro of them, which means they're absolutely awesome anyway. But we're going to cover off the Hardened and Elite cards today. We're going to start with the Hardened cards. We're going to cover off the worst 5 cards in Hardened tier. Then we'll cover off the worst 5 cards in the Elite tier, and then we'll cover off the worst stats, and then we'll move across to the best male cards in the Elite tier, and then the best stats those have as well. Let me know what you think of this in the comment section below, and if you could do me a huge favor and hit a massive thumbs up on this video, that would be amazing, just to share it about and get other people to see this, because they might want to know what the best cards are in SuperCard Season 3 as well. So let's start off, and we're going to go down from 5 to 1, and that is going to be, first of all, looking at Rich Swan and Cedric Alexander. These two are the unfortunate branding of being the 5th worst cards in the tier, but with the recent introduction of the Cruiserweights, I'm really not that surprised by this. But Swan and Cedric Alexander, or Swan as we are speaking now, the current Cruiserweight champion of WWE, and Cedric Alexander, one of the other Cruiserweights as well in the company. Then we move on to a trifecta, a triple threat of the 4th worst cards in the tier. And we're talking about Andrade Almas, Apollo Crews, and Curt Hawkins, who want you to face the facts. Well, he's facing the facts. Unfortunately, he is the 4th worst card in the tier. All of them have exactly the same stats in terms of the overalls. So you'll probably see similar stats, maybe move from power to speed or toughness to charisma. It happens a lot in Season 3. There's not so many cards that stand out great. There'll be a couple of cards that have very similar stats in different areas. But now we're going to move on to a card where a character in WWE he just can't seem to get anywhere. And he's on Raw one day, off Raw the next day, and just doesn't seem to have a consistent schedule within the company, and that is Neville. Unfortunately, after breaking his ankle, his foot, I think it was, on breaking his leg, he had a horrific injury when facing Chris Jericho, came back, and really since then he hasn't been seen much since. And him and Sami Zayn have had a tag team thing where they were going to do it, but then Sami Zayn has started his thing against Braun Strowman, as where we're talking right now, and Neville's just kind of been told, just go there. At this point, I'm thinking maybe it's better that Neville takes part in the UK Championship when it comes up, or maybe goes back to NXT. The second worst card in Hardened tier, unfortunately, also bestows to Kalisto. He's not been given many great cards in the game, in total, if I'm going to be honest with you. His SummerSlam and WrestleMania cards were some of the worst available, so maybe this isn't much of a surprise. It definitely seems since the Lucha Dragons in his US title reign, after having to go one-on-one with Ryback so often, maybe we should blame Ryback. You know, can we just get like a huge hashtag, blame Ryback, in the comment section, because yeah, he screwed up Kalisto big time. Even though he's got a good thing going on Baron Corbin at the moment, who's a very surprising card actually. One of the best in Ultimate tier, so he's kind of good. Just bear that in mind if you're in this tier right now and you want to get up to Ultimate. Baron Corbin's not bad at all. and we're going to cover off the worst card in the tier. Unfortunately, that honor does bestow to Tyler Breeze, which really isn't surprising given how much the company is using him for a jobber. I mean, the fashion police angle, I mean, it's great, and you probably would have said that he's probably better, or should be better than the cruiserweights, some of the cruiserweights in the division. But such is the rankings for WWE SuperCard Season 3. So now we're going to skip on to the Elite Tier and go through some of the worst cards in Elite Tier. I'm going to cover off number 5, the 5th worst card in the tier, and that is, stat-wise, Bo Dallas. Yes, the president of the Bo Leave Association, unfortunately, doesn't fare well in the Elite Tier at all, really. And Luke Harper is his next one following up after that. Luke Harper, unfortunately, in fact, during Season 3, I believe during his development, Luke Harper really wasn't around much. He only recently reappeared WWE, and now he's even being considered for WWE World Championship matches, so I imagine that will change in the future. He also had a really killer card with the IC Championship back in Season 1. I wish that image could be reused again, but it's unlikely we'll ever see it again. And that's something I would throw in there. Maybe if we got the ability to buy or use, I don't know, Money in the Bank contracts to get old images that no longer exist in the game, or have them as rewards for a certain game mode, I just can see that being way more beneficial than just having those cards kind of sit in the dust. Next one is Eric Rowan. Well, this isn't surprising at all. The following one afterwards, again, not surprising, very similar to Eric Rowan, and that is a card that a buddy of mine, Radish, has had lots of fun with. Go and check out the video if you haven't seen it already. Titus O'Neil. This guy might be, one of the best dads in WWE, but unfortunately you might have seen him and someone else on this list recently had a match, and it lasted all of like 10 seconds. I mean, the guy's getting wasted. Unfortunately, he was on something good, and then apparently you don't touch Vince McMahon. And if you don't touch Vince McMahon, then you won't get suspended and lose your push. So let's move on to the worst card of the Elite Tier. For a lot of you, this won't be much of a surprise, but that is Mark Henry. Unfortunately, Mark Henry does have some of the worst stats in the tier, but you won't be surprised to know that he isn't alone. The second and joint worst card in the tier is actually the Big Show. He unfortunately does have one of the worst sets of stats going along with Mark Henry. So yeah, unfortunately, Crying Big Show is the worst card in the tier along with Mark Henry, which is not surprising. So let's cover off the worst stats in the tier, and that's going to be looking at power and toughness, which will be unfortunately bestowed upon Bo Dallas. Coming in with the worst speed is the Big Show, and coming with the worst charisma is Mark Henry. Now moving back to the Hardened Tier, if we go back to there, the worst power unfortunately belongs to Rich Swan. The worst toughness belongs to the gorgeous one, Tyler Breeze. And the worst speed belongs to Hawkins, whereas Kalisto, the second worst card in the tier, does unfortunately have the worst charisma. But moving on to the best cards in the tier. Now again, this is purely based on stats, not based on personal opinion. So I'm purely covering off the overall stats, calculating them together and coming out with a complete list of the best and worst cards. I'm going to cover off the hardened cards. This is going to be a bit different. I'm going to cover off the hardened cards, the best hardened cards, then the best hardened stats, then the best elite cards, and the best elite stats. Now you will notice with the best cards in the tier across Season 3, there's a lot of repeats. And in fairness, the best stats actually belong to the same people, so that won't be too hard to cover off. Let's go and look at the best cards in Hardened Tier. Now the best cards in Hardened Tier, and the way we're going to cover that off is again 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go from the 5th best to the 1st best. First of all, cover off Dean Ambrose, John Cena, and Shinsuke Nakamura. All 3 of these cards have the same overall stats. But 2 of these cards, in fact all 3 of these cards, have one stat which is the best in the tier, which I'll let you guys guess just for a moment. But they're going to cover off number 4, which is Kevin Owens. That's not really surprising at all because he is the Universal Champion at this point, so maybe we shouldn't be too surprised. Number 3 does belong to AJ Styles and Brock Lesnar. And both those cards are both very, very good cards. In fairness, Brock Lesnar has, again, one of the best stats in the tier. AJ Styles, again, has another one of the best stats in the tier. And now we move on to number 2, which is Seth Rollins. Now, Seth Rollins does not share any of the best stats in the tier, but he's got one of the best overall spreads, especially when it comes to toughness, speed, and charisma. And he's got a nice little boost on power, which means that he does avoid cards like Nakamura and Dean Ambrose and beats them in no stats. But we come down to number 1, and number 1 in Season 3 is actually quite surprising, but maybe balances out the tiers a little bit when it comes down to the best cards when we're looking at brands. So Raw, SmackDown, NXT, and WWE SuperCard Season 3 is based around those brands. So Samoa Joe being number 1, although again, like Rollins, doesn't have one of the best stats in the tier, but he does have some of the best overall stats in the tier, which is what I'm saying. Some of the best stats in the tier might not actually matter too much. They might mean everything to you because you might want to use those in your King of the Rings. But Samoa Joe is the best card in Hardened Tier. I won't cover off the stats because the stats are almost identical in terms of the best stats in the tier. We'll cover those off right at the end. And we go on to the Elite tier now. That the list doesn't really change too much. There's a couple of small changes, but let's just cover off the Ambrose, Cena, and Nakamura, which I'll show you. There's Dean Ambrose here. I can't find John Cena because, well, we can't see him. And Shinsuke Nakamura. So they all have the same overall stat points, and those are the 5th best cards in the Elite tier. Moving up forward, and very similar to the Hardened, Owens is the 4th best. 3rd best is AJ Styles. And then you have number 2, which is Brock Lesnar, who takes up spot number 2. And spot number 2, again, he has one of the best stats in the tier. Cover those off in a second. But number 1 of this list does actually belong to 2 people. Now, I mentioned already that there's a couple of times that the stats are exactly the same. And it is, again, Samoa Joe and Seth Rollins. Let's find Samoa Joe and Rollins for. I think they'll be on the same. There you go. There is Samoa Joe and there is Seth Rollins over here, which I cannot find. Here, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? There he is. Seth frickin' Rollins. He has, again, like Samoa Joe and like in Hardened Tier, some of the best overall stats in the tier, but not one specific stat. So you're probably wondering who does have the best stats in Hardened and Elite tier. We're going to find out now. First of all, the charisma, the best charisma, does belong to John Cena and Shinsuke Nakamura. Probably surprised there. I was surprised, given the fact that he may be the NXT champion, but he's not in the main roster yet. I'm surprised that his stats are as good as they are. But I'm not complaining because his card is beast. Moving on to speed, that across all the tiers, there's no point even mentioning it in any other tier because it's been the same since WrestleMania tier. It does belong to AJ Styles. AJ Styles has the highest speed. He's also one of the best cards in the game, full stop. You know, it's not even much point talking about it. Best toughness, because of the lack of Undertaker in the tiers at the moment, does belong to Dean Ambrose, and his stats are pretty freaking amazing. He's one of the only cards, and I mentioned this about having some certain cards that are maybe not the best of the best, but they are really useful. Dean Ambrose, Shinsuke Nakamura, incredible, amazing, so much better than some of the other top cards in Elite, even Ultimate tier. You want to have these cards as kind of additional backup, and probably I would use these more in King of the Ring maybe than a Brock Lesnar card, purely because Brock Lesnar, whilst being good, only really has one amazing stat, which is the best power stat in the tier thus far, and that is it from me. Let me know what you think of the Elite and the Hardened cards and the individual stats, which ones are the best in the tier, in the comment section below. Remember to leave a like on the video and also subscribe to the channel. That is me done and dusted. The next one we'll be talking about the best and worst females of Hardened and Elite tier. I'll see you all soon. But one last thing before we go, and that is to Zulif!